I used to think betrayal would come with screaming matches or obvious warning signs. Instead, it walked right through my front door at 2 in the morning, reeking of chemical smoke and spitting out the most cruel words I had ever heard. This is the story of how I calmly gathered the ruins and cast a net to burn down the entire arrogant world of the man who trampled on my self-worth. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Kayla Mitchell. I am 31 years old and I work as a senior risk data analyst at Aethera Nexus Dynamics, a corporate firm located right in the bustling heart of Denver. My daily life is entirely built on predictability. I spend my hours staring at complex spreadsheets, calculating probabilities, and mitigating financial disasters before they even have a chance to materialize. I am a pragmatic person who finds deep comfort in logic and order. Numbers do not lie. They do not suddenly change their minds or decide they want an entirely different life overnight. For 6 years, my marriage felt just as solid, reliable, and calculable as the data I worked with every day. My husband, Julian, is 33. He is a high-end luxury real estate broker, and quite unlike me, he does not find peace in stability. Julian is a man who runs entirely on the potent fuel of ambition and status. He is always looking upward, his hungry eyes fixed on the towering penthouses and sprawling mountain estates he sells to people who have more money than they know how to spend. He desperately wants to be one of them, to sit at their tables and live their lives. For a very long time, I genuinely thought his relentless drive was one of his best qualities. We balanced each other out beautifully. I was the anchor keeping us grounded in reality, and he was the sail pushing us forward toward a better future. We shared a stunning suburban home, 2 steady incomes, and a warm, comfortable routine. It was a good life. It was a safe, quiet life. But a quiet life was no longer enough for him. The subtle, creeping changes started about 4 months ago. It began when Julian landed a major new client. He was practically vibrating with manic excitement when he came home that evening, tossing his expensive leather briefcase onto the granite kitchen counter. He proudly announced that he had just taken over the exclusive investment portfolio of Chloe Sterling. Chloe was not just wealthy, she was ultra-rich. The exact kind of woman whose family name was boldly stamped on modern museum wings and high society charity galas. Julian was handpicked to manage her multi-million-dollar property acquisitions across the state, and from that very moment on, the warm atmosphere in our home noticeably shifted into something cold and resentful. Suddenly, everything we had built was no longer adequate. The 6 years of steady, loving companionship we shared started to feel like a cage he was desperate to break out of. He began to look at me differently. It was not a sudden explosion of anger, but a slow, agonizing drip of disapproval. One evening, as we were getting ready for a dinner reservation, Julian leaned against the doorframe of our bedroom, his arms crossed over his perfectly tailored suit. He looked at the simple, comfortable dress I was wearing and sighed heavily. "Are you really going to wear that out tonight?" he asked, his tone dripping with a condescension I had never heard from him before. I looked down at my dress, completely confused. "What is wrong with it? We are just going to the Italian place down the street." "There is nothing wrong with it if you want to look like a mid-level desk worker for the rest of your life," he sneered. "Chloe wore an outfit to a casual lunch yesterday that cost more than your entire wardrobe. It is about presenting value. Kayla, you have no drive to elevate yourself." I was completely stunned into silence. He had never in our 6 years of marriage spoken to me with such blatant disrespect, but the cruelty did not stop there. The harsh comparisons quickly became a toxic daily ritual in our household. He aggressively criticized my corporate job, calling my vital analytical work completely tedious and uninspired. He openly scoffed at my simple contentment with our beautiful suburban home, constantly bringing up the sprawling, glass-walled mansions he was personally touring with Chloe. He talked about Chloe incessantly. It was always Chloe thinks this investment is better, or Chloe bought that car yesterday. Instead of confronting him and demanding respect, I did what I do best as an analyst. I managed the immediate risk. I forcefully buried my growing unease deep down in my chest and desperately rationalized his cruel remarks. I told myself over and over that managing a demanding client of that magnitude came with immense, crushing pressure. I convinced myself that his harsh words were just the professional stress talking, a temporary side effect of him trying to aggressively secure our long-term financial future. I carefully maintained the velvet curtain of our peaceful home, desperately ignoring the dark storm clouds gathering right outside our front door. I actively chose to stay blind to the dangerous cracks forming in our walls, terrified that if I looked too closely, the entire foundation of my perfect life would crumble beneath me. It was exactly 2 a.m. when the heavy oak door of our entryway slammed against the drywall with a violent, echoing thud. The sudden noise completely shattered the absolute silence of the house. I had been sitting rigidly on the edge of the living room sofa, my eyes burning from staring blindly at the dark driveway for 4 agonizing hours. I leaped up and rushed into the foyer, my bare feet slapping against the freezing hardwood floor. Julian was leaning heavily against the doorframe, his expensive tailored suit jacket hanging uselessly off one shoulder. His silk tie loosened and completely crooked. The exact moment I got close to him, a dense, suffocating cloud hit my face like a physical blow. It was a potent, heavy stench of high-grade marijuana, thick and skunky, completely overpowering the crisp, familiar scent of his everyday cologne. But woven deeply beneath that pungent smoke was something entirely different. It was a rich, intoxicating, fiercely feminine perfume. It smelled intensely of dark amber, crushed vanilla, and raw sweat. It was an intimately personal scent, a deeply provocative, lingering scent that definitively did not belong to me and had absolutely no place inside my home. I reached out instinctively, extending my hands to catch his arm, genuinely terrified he was going to stumble and crack his head open on the sharp edge of the console table. "Julian, let me help you," I said, my voice trembling uncontrollably as my fingers lightly brushed his wrinkled sleeve. He violently ripped his arm away from my grasp. The sudden, aggressive force of his movement threw me completely off balance, and I stumbled backward, my shoulder hitting the wall. He did not apologize. He did not even flinch. Instead, he stood up straighter, swaying dangerously, and fixed his bloodshot, glassy eyes on me. There was no warmth in his gaze, no guilt for coming home so late, no confusion. There was only a cold, naked, absolute disgust. His eyes dragged slowly, deliberately up and down my body, taking in the oversized, faded gray cotton pajamas I wore to bed. A cruel, lopsided sneer violently twisted his mouth. "Look at you," he slurred, his words dripping with a heavy, venomous contempt. "Look at what I have to come home to every single night. You look pathetic. You look like a miserable, uncultured peasant." My breath caught painfully in my throat. My heart began to hammer wildly against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. "You are heavily intoxicated. Julian, you are barely standing. Just let me get you to the bedroom. Do not touch me," he spat out viciously, pointing a shaking, aggressive finger directly at my face. "Do not pretend you are taking care of me. You are dragging me down. You have been dragging me down into your miserable, boring, suffocating little life for 6 entire years." He let out a harsh, breathless laugh that echoed unnaturally in the quiet, dim hallway. He stumbled clumsily past me into the living room, aggressively kicking his expensive leather shoes off in 2 completely different directions. "I am sleeping with Chloe," he announced loudly. Those 5 words dropped into the middle of the room like a live explosive device. There was absolutely no hesitation, no drunken remorse, no cowardly softening of the brutal blow. He said it with a sickeningly proud, victorious smirk plastered on his face. He leaned heavily against the back of the leather armchair, panting slightly, and looked straight into my frozen, horrified expression. You hear me? I am sleeping with her, and it is completely incredible. It is absolute fire. Kayla, she makes me feel completely alive. When I'm with her, I am a god. I am exactly where I belong, living a massive, beautiful life you cannot even begin to comprehend. The entire room started to spin violently. My legs felt like solid lead blocks. I stood perfectly still, entirely unable to form a single coherent syllable. He was not finished destroying me. The heavy mixture of alcohol and drugs had completely stripped away his carefully crafted professional filter, leaving only the monstrous, greedy, arrogant truth behind. Coming back here to this sterile box, coming back to you, makes me want to rip my own skin off, he continued, his voice rising in aggressive, hateful volume. You are a dead weight. You are a tasteless, invisible rock sitting right in the middle of my path. I am destined for millions. I am destined for absolute greatness in this city. And you are just a simple, uninspired analyst who wants to watch boring television on a Friday night. I am so entirely sick of pretending I am happy with your pathetic mediocrity. Every single word was a deliberate, calculated stab aimed directly at my core. He actively wanted to destroy me. He was openly reveling in the cruelty, feeding his own massively inflated ego by tearing my dignity into tiny, unrecognizable shreds. He took a staggering step forward, gesturing wildly with his hands, vividly describing the luxurious silk sheets, the rushing adrenaline, the absolute intoxicating power he felt tangled up in Chloe's arms. He painted a vivid, filthy, devastating picture of his betrayal right there in the middle of our living room. Then, as abruptly as the vicious tirade had started, his manic energy completely vanished. His eyes rolled back slightly into his head, his knees buckled beneath him, and he collapsed face first onto the plush living room rug. A heavy, wet snore ripped from his throat almost instantly. He was completely dead to the world, sleeping soundly and peacefully amidst the catastrophic wreckage he had just intentionally created. I stood frozen in the exact center of the room. For the first 5 minutes, the agonizing pain was entirely physical. My chest burned intensely as if I had swallowed crushed glass. My vision blurred rapidly with hot, blinding tears of utter helpless humiliation. The man I had deeply loved, the man I had carefully built my entire adulthood around, had just slaughtered my heart and comfortably gone to sleep on the floor. But then, as I stared silently down at his motionless, pathetic, drooling body, a massive, tectonic shift occurred deep inside my brain. The hysterical, suffocating panic suddenly drained away. The crushing, weeping sorrow completely evaporated into thin air. The hot tears stopped falling entirely. In their place, a terrifying, absolute freezing cold spread slowly through my veins. The analytical, calculating, ruthless part of my mind, the exact part he had just viciously mocked, woke up completely. I did not want to scream. I did not want to cry. I wanted to completely and permanently dismantle him. I stood over his snoring body for exactly 20 minutes, letting the freezing clarity wash over my mind and lock away my shattered heart. Any other woman might have packed a suitcase, driven to a friend's house, or started throwing expensive vases at his head. But I am a risk data analyst. I do not react to a crisis with blind emotion. I react by gathering intelligence. A sudden, chaotic divorce would give him time to hide his assets and spin the narrative to make me look like a hysterical, jealous wife. I needed undeniable, concrete proof. I needed the raw data of his destruction. I knelt down beside him on the rug. The sickening smell of stale marijuana and expensive perfumes still clung to his clothes. Holding my breath, I carefully slid my hand into the pocket of his discarded suit jacket and pulled out his sleek smartphone. I then unclasped his leather briefcase and retrieved his work tablet. Julian was in such a deep, chemically induced coma that he did not even twitch when I firmly pressed his right thumb against the fingerprint sensors of both devices. The screens illuminated the dark room, instantly granting me full access to his entire hidden life. I carried the devices to the kitchen island, opened my personal laptop, and began the meticulous process of extraction. It did not take long to find the evidence. He had not even tried to be clever about it. There was a hidden messaging application buried inside a folder labeled for client contracts. When I opened it, the sheer volume of their depravity hit me like a physical blow. But it was not just the graphic, sickening messages detailing what they did to each other that made my blood run cold. It was where they were doing it. Julian and Chloe were not sneaking off to discreet luxury hotels or renting private apartments. They were using the ultra-exclusive, vacant mega mansions that his real estate firm was trusted to sell. I scrolled through the chat history, my eyes scanning over addresses of properties listed for $15 million, $22 million, and upwards. They were turning the pristine, staged beds of Denver's most elite real estate into their personal playgrounds. This was not just infidelity. This was a catastrophic, career-ending violation of his professional licensing and his firm's strict code of ethics. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I systematically exported every single text thread, every voice note, and every highly explicit photograph they had exchanged over the last 4 months. I created a heavily encrypted, untraceable cloud drive and uploaded the entire massive file. I also took screenshots of his calendar, specifically noting the upcoming dates and times he had marked as private property inspections. Those were not inspections. Those were their scheduled rendezvous. By 4:30 in the morning, the backup was completely finished. But I needed one more piece of critical information. I needed to know exactly who Chloe Sterling was accountable to. I opened a private browser window and ran a deep background search on her family name. Within 10 minutes, I had my answer staring back at me from the screen, and a cold, triumphant smile slowly spread across my face. Chloe was married to Marcus Sterling. He was not just a wealthy man. He was a notoriously ruthless, predatory tech investor who had famously bankrupted 3 rival companies in Denver just because they crossed him on a minor deal. Marcus was a man fiercely protective of his public image and entirely unforgiving of public humiliation. Julian had not just picked a wealthy lover, he had actively chosen to sleep with the wife of the most dangerous, vindictive shark in the state. I carefully wiped his devices clean of my fingerprints, locked them, and placed them exactly where I had found them. Then, I went up to the master bedroom, took a hot shower to wash off the invisible dirt I felt clinging to my skin, and got into bed. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, the heavy footsteps bounding up the stairs signaled Julian's awakening. He burst into the bedroom, his face completely pale, his eyes wide with absolute, frantic panic. The drugs and alcohol had worn off, leaving him entirely sober and fully aware of the catastrophic confession he had made hours earlier. He threw himself onto the edge of the mattress, grabbing my hands with trembling fingers. "Kayla, you have to listen to me," he stammered, his voice cracking with desperate fear. "Last night, I do not know what I said. I was at a party with some new developers, and someone gave me something, a pill. I had a horrific, toxic reaction. I was hallucinating completely out of my mind. Nothing I said was real. I swear to you on my life, nothing happened with Chloe or anyone else. It was just the drugs talking, making up insane, psychotic delusions. It was the most pathetic, clumsy, easily disprovable lie I had ever heard. But I needed him to believe that I was exactly the naive, boring, safely predictable wife he thought I was. I needed him to drop his guard entirely. I let out a soft, broken sob. I pulled my hands away to wipe a perfectly timed tear from my cheek. "You terrified me, Julian," I whispered, keeping my voice shaky and fragile. "You said such awful, cruel things to me. I thought my entire world was ending. I am so sorry, baby," he pleaded, reaching out to pull me into a tight embrace. I forced myself not to violently flinch when his arms wrapped around my shoulders. "I love you, only you. I will never touch that garbage again. I promise. Please, just forgive me." I rested my chin on his shoulder, staring blankly at the beige wall behind him. My heart was entirely dead. but my mind was operating at maximum capacity. "I forgive you," I said softly into his ear. "I know how much pressure you are under. Let us just put it behind us." I felt his entire body instantly sag with massive relief. He exhaled a long, heavy breath, completely convinced he had dodged a fatal bullet. He genuinely believed his brilliant acting had saved him. He had absolutely no idea that the curtain had already been raised on my stage, and I had just handed him the script for his own spectacular execution. For exactly 30 days, I transformed myself into the absolute embodiment of the perfect, oblivious wife. Every single morning, I woke up at 6 in the morning, brewed his favorite dark roast coffee, and kissed his cheek before he left for work. Every evening, I greeted him with a warm smile and a prepared dinner, listening intently as he spun elaborate lies about his exhausting days at the office. I washed his clothes. I ironed the very shirts he wore to meet her, carefully smoothing out the collars with the hot iron while imagining the destruction I was about to unleash. It was a suffocating, agonizing performance that required every ounce of my willpower and professional discipline. But underneath that carefully constructed mask of domestic compliance, I was systematically dismantling our shared existence piece by piece. While he was busy playing the high society playboy and showing off to his billionaire client, I spent my lunch break sitting in my locked car, aggressively restructuring my financial reality. I quietly opened a new, highly secure account at a completely different banking institution under my maiden name. Day by day, transaction by careful transaction, I siphoned exactly 50% of our joint liquid assets into my private vault. I left his precious commissions completely untouched, taking only what legally and rightfully belonged to my steady income over our 6 years together. I canceled joint credit cards, removed my name from any shared liabilities, and quietly locked down my personal credit. By the time the 4th week rolled around, my financial escape route was solidly paved in concrete. But financial independence was only the baseline. I needed absolute, irrefutable destruction. The kind of destruction that could not be explained away by a bad trip, a misunderstood text message, or a clever lawyer. Through a discreet corporate contact at my analytics firm, I acquired the services of a highly skilled private investigator. He was a retired federal agent, a man with cold, unblinking eyes, who asked absolutely zero moral questions and only demanded to be paid in thick stacks of unmarked cash. We met in a dimly lit diner on the extreme outskirts of the city to avoid any chance of recognition. I slid a thick envelope containing $10,000 across the sticky table, along with the precise address of a breathtaking, entirely glass-walled architectural masterpiece perched high on the northern hills. It was the undisputed crown jewel of his firm's current brokerage listings, a spectacular property priced at $35 million, and according to the extracted calendar data I possessed, it was their absolute favorite playground. My instructions to the investigator were chillingly simple and direct. I needed high definition. Motion-activated cameras hidden in the master bedroom, the main living area, and the grand entryway of that specific vacant property. The investigator nodded exactly once, slid the heavy envelope into his jacket pocket, and walked out without saying a single word. 48 hours later, a secure, encrypted video feed appeared on my personal laptop screen. Sitting entirely alone in my dark home office, I watched the live transmission with the cold, unfeeling detachment of a scientist observing a predictable, nasty experiment. The footage was violently clear. I watched my husband unlock the massive front door of the multi-million-dollar estate. I watched Chloe walk in directly behind him, dropping her heavy designer bag onto the pristine marble floor. I sat perfectly still as the hidden camera captured every single undeniable, horrific act they committed right on the expensive staging furniture. They were totally arrogant, completely secure in their stolen privacy, and utterly oblivious to the digital eye recording their career-ending felony. I meticulously downloaded every single frame of the high-definition video, saving it to 3 separate secure locations. This was no longer just a sad story of a broken marriage. It was legally actionable evidence of trespassing, gross professional misconduct, and a blatant violation of his sacred real estate license. Armed with this devastating arsenal, I took the following afternoon off from work and walked into the pristine, intimidating downtown office of the most ruthless, bloodthirsty divorce attorney in the entire state of Colorado. She was a legendary woman known for leaving cheating spouses with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. I sat across from her massive mahogany desk and handed over a thick manila folder containing the financial transcripts, the extracted text logs, and a sleek black flash drive holding the undeniable video files. She reviewed the material in complete silence for 20 long minutes. When she finally looked up at me, a sharp, predatory smile cut across her face. Within 2 hours, every single piece of legal paperwork was aggressively drafted, reviewed, and securely locked in my leather briefcase. The final piece of the puzzle fell perfectly into place exactly 2 days later. Julian walked into our kitchen on a Thursday evening, practically buzzing with an electric, poorly concealed excitement. He leaned against the granite counter, casually swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. "I have to head out of town this weekend," he announced, effortlessly lying straight to my face with practiced ease. "The firm is sending me to an exclusive, closed-door real estate seminar up in the mountains. It is a massive networking opportunity for the upper echelon. I will be gone for 3 days, Friday through Sunday." I turned away from the kitchen sink, wiping my wet hands on a towel, and gave him an understanding, totally supportive smile. "That sounds amazing for your career," I said smoothly, ensuring my voice remained completely steady and warm. "You should absolutely go. Do not worry about anything here. I will take care of the house." "You are the best." He smiled widely, stepping forward to press a quick, deceitful kiss to my forehead. I watched him walk out of the kitchen, feeling a dark, icy thrill race aggressively down my spine. I knew he was not going to any seminar. I knew exactly where he was going. He was taking her to the glass mansion on the hill for a luxurious 3-day weekend of uninterrupted sin. He thought he was walking into a romantic, high-class paradise. He had absolutely no idea that he was happily marching straight into the absolute dead center of a steel trap. And I was holding the only key. Friday afternoon arrived with a heavy, electric tension thick in the air. Julian had packed his finest tailored suits into his expensive leather weekender bag, kissed my cheek with that same repulsive, practiced smile, and driven off toward his imaginary real estate seminar. The exact second his car disappeared around the corner of our quiet suburban street, my final transformation was completely finished. I walked straight into my home office, firmly locked the heavy wooden door, and booted up my encrypted personal laptop. It was finally time to light the match and drop it directly onto the gasoline-soaked empire he had so arrogantly built. As a senior data analyst, my entire career revolves around managing variables and predicting disastrous outcomes. Today, I was actively manipulating the most volatile, dangerous human variables on the board. I was weaponizing pride, explosive rage, and bottomless corporate greed. My very first target was the formidable Marcus Sterling. A man of his immense financial stature and notoriously ruthless reputation did not handle public humiliation or quiet disrespect. He brutally destroyed anyone who dared to touch what legally belonged to him. I did not need to write a long, emotional letter or offer any complicated, dramatic explanations to provoke him. I only needed to present the raw, unfiltered data, using a highly sophisticated network of international servers to completely mask my digital footprint. I drafted a blank, anonymous email and addressed it directly to his private, highly secure inbox. I did not use empty threats. I let the visual evidence speak entirely for itself. For the attachment, I selected a single, high-definition still image pulled directly from the hidden camera feed. It was a perfectly clear, brutally indisputable photograph of Julian and Chloe, completely entangled on the plush living room rug of the vacant glass mansion, their faces undeniably illuminated by the expensive ambient lighting. Below the sickening image, I typed exactly 2 lines of text. The first line was the exact street address of the $35 million property. The second line was a precise time frame, stating they would be occupying the master suite starting at exactly 4 o'clock this afternoon. I hit send and watched the packet vanish into the digital ether, knowing with absolute certainty it was a targeted missile heading straight for the chest of a very dangerous, unforgiving man. But Marcus Sterling seeking his personal vengeance was only half of my masterpiece, a private beating or a quiet, swept under the rug divorce settlement would never be enough punishment for the immense psychological damage Julian had done to my life. I needed his professional identity totally and permanently annihilated. I needed the very prestigious firm he worshipped to be the one holding the executioner's axe. I immediately opened a new browser tab, registering a fake, high-level corporate domain name. I drafted a secondary email, this time perfectly posing as an aggressive, high-powered acquisition agent representing an anonymous, foreign billionaire. I addressed this urgent message directly to the senior managing director of Julian's luxury real estate agency. The email I crafted was an absolute masterclass in exploiting unbridled corporate greed. I explicitly stated that my ultra-wealthy client was prepared to make an immediate, all-cash offer of $40 million for the glass mansion on the hill. However, I added a massive, high-pressure catch. I claimed my client was flying out to Dubai at exactly 6 o'clock this evening and required an emergency, immediate walkthrough of the property right now to finalize the massive wire transfer. I demanded that a senior member of the board of directors personally meet us at the property to unlock the doors and facilitate the immediate, lucrative transaction. I knew exactly how these greedy, commission-hungry executives operated. The intoxicating prospect of securing a $40 million cash sale on a quiet Friday afternoon would completely override any standard scheduling protocols or safety checks. The director would drop absolutely everything, grab the master keys, and speed up the mountain to blindly secure the golden goose. With the digital traps perfectly set and the countdown officially ticking, I closed my laptop, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and walked out of the empty house. I drove my unassuming sedan up the winding, treacherous mountain roads, navigating the sharp, dangerous curves with a freezing, unnatural calm. The air grew significantly colder and thinner the higher I climbed into the elevation. By the time I reached the final, secluded stretch of road leading up to the architectural masterpiece, the late afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the jagged mountain peaks, casting long, menacing shadows across the rugged landscape. I did not pull into the massive, sweeping circular driveway. Instead, I parked my car a quarter of a mile down the winding road, carefully reversing into a dense, heavily wooded grove of towering pine trees. The thick, dark branches provided perfect natural camouflage for my vehicle. I rolled down my driver's side window just an inch, allowing the biting, freezing mountain wind to sweep into the cabin. The sharp smell of fresh pine and damp earth immediately filled my lungs. I sat in the absolute, heavy silence, listening to the rhythmic ticking of my dashboard clock. Every single passing minute felt like a heavy, deliberate heartbeat. My hands gripped the cold leather steering wheel, not out of nervous fear, but out of a profound, overwhelming sense of dark anticipation. I visualized Julian inside that house, arrogant and completely blind to his reality, pouring an expensive drink and laughing, having absolutely zero concept that the solid ground beneath his feet had already collapsed. I did not have to wait very long. Exactly 45 minutes after I sent the encrypted emails, the distant, angry roar of a heavily modified engine shattered the quiet peace of the mountain forest. A sleek, midnight black sports car tore around the final corner at a terrifying, deeply reckless speed. The tires aggressively chewed up the loose gravel as the heavy vehicle violently swerved into the long driveway of the glass mansion. The driver's side door flew open before the car had even fully stopped moving, and Marcus Sterling stepped out. Even from my hidden distance, the sheer, radiating fury coming off the man was entirely palpable. He looked like a towering, violent storm cloud. His fists clenched tightly at his sides as he marched aggressively toward the grand entrance. Less than 2 minutes later, a silver luxury sedan came speeding up the steep road, braking sharply right behind the black sports car. The senior director of the real estate agency practically tumbled out of the driver's seat, frantically clutching a leather portfolio and a jingling set of brass keys, completely out of breath and desperate to make his phantom $40 million sale. The director ran up the stone steps, hurriedly unlocking the massive front doors. Marcus Sterling did not wait for a polite invitation. He violently shoved his way past the bewildered, stammering executive and stormed directly into the silent house. The stage was perfectly set. The actors were all in their assigned places. I took a slow, deep breath of the freezing mountain air, feeling the ultimate victory settling into my bones. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the thick, heavy gray folder containing my finalized, airtight divorce papers. I opened my car door and stepped out onto the dirt path. The gravel crunched softly beneath my boots as I began to walk slowly, deliberately, and proudly up the long driveway. I was no longer the pathetic, invisible, boring wife crying helplessly on the living room floor. I was the supreme architect of their absolute destruction, and I was walking straight toward the slightly open massive doors to watch my beautiful masterpiece burn to the ground. The heavy oak doors of the grand entrance had been left wide open by the frantic executive, completely shattering the quiet solitude of the mountain estate. As I stepped over the threshold and walked onto the pristine marble floor, the absolute chaos echoing from the second floor was a magnificent symphony to my ears. There were no polite introductions or civilized conversations happening upstairs. The air was violently torn apart by the sound of shattering glass and a high-pitched, terrified scream that belonged entirely to Chloe. I walked slowly up the floating glass staircase, taking my time, savoring every single step toward the glorious climax of my meticulously planned destruction. When I reached the open doorway of the master suite, the scene unfolding inside was a masterpiece of absolute devastation. The heavy silk curtains had been ripped down. A priceless bedside lamp was smashed into 1,000 jagged pieces across the expensive hardwood floor. Marcus Sterling was standing at the foot of the massive king-sized bed, an imposing figure of terrifying, unrestrained rage. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of crimson, and his massive hands were tightly clenched into fists at his sides. He was not shouting anymore. He had crossed over into a deadly, chillingly quiet anger that promised absolute financial and social ruin. Cowering on the far side of the luxurious mattress, desperately clutching a white silk sheet against her trembling body, was Chloe. All of her arrogant, high society confidence had been completely vaporized. She was sobbing hysterically, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. But my eyes immediately locked onto Julian. The man who had proudly declared himself a god just weeks ago was now backed entirely into a corner, completely naked and trembling violently like a trapped animal. All the color had entirely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. He was desperately holding a decorative throw pillow in front of him, frantically trying to shield himself from the murderous glare of the city's most ruthless billionaire. Standing just inside the room, clutching his leather portfolio like a shield, was the senior director of the real estate agency. The older man was panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically between the naked couple and the furious husband. The intoxicating dream of a $40 million commission had violently morphed into a catastrophic, career-ending nightmare right before his eyes. Do you have any idea what you have just done?" The director screamed at Julian, his voice cracking with absolute panic and fury. "I rushed up here to close a massive international deal, only to find you violently violating our most sacred company policies. You brought a client's wife into a $35 million staging property. You have completely disgraced this entire firm. You are a massive liability. As of this exact second, you are permanently terminated. I will make absolutely certain that your real estate license is completely revoked by the state board before the sun comes up. You will never work in this industry again." Julian choked on a sob, his wide, panicked eyes darting around the room. desperately looking for an escape that simply did not exist. "Please, listen to me," he begged pathetically, his voice a weak, desperate whine. "This is a massive misunderstanding. We were just inspecting the property. I can explain everything. I swear I did not mean for any of this to happen." Marcus took one single, threatening step forward, and Julian instantly recoiled, pressing his bare back against the cold glass of the window. "You are going to lose absolutely everything," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper. "By the time my legal team is finished with you, you will not have a single penny to your name. I will bury you so deep that no one in this city will even remember your face. You touched what belongs to me, and you will pay for it for the rest of your miserable life." It was precisely in that moment of absolute, suffocating despair that I chose to make my presence known. I stepped fully into the master bedroom, my heavy winter boots clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. The sudden sound made every single person in the room freeze and turn their heads toward the doorway. Julian saw me, and for a split second, a flash of genuine relief washed over his pathetic face. In his deeply twisted, arrogant mind, I was still the naive, forgiving wife who would fiercely protect him from the monsters. He completely believed I had somehow tracked his phone to save him from this nightmare. "Kayla," he breathed out, his voice shaking. "Kayla, thank God you are here. Tell them I am a good man. Help me fix this." I did not offer him a warm smile. I did not shed a single tear. I maintained an expression of absolute, freezing indifference. I walked slowly across the room, completely ignoring the stunned billionaire and the hyperventilating director. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from my naked, trembling husband. I raised my hand and threw the heavy gray folder containing the signed divorce papers directly onto his bare chest. The thick stack of legal documents hit his skin with a satisfying slap before scattering onto the floor at his feet. He stared down at the papers in complete shock, his mind entirely unable to process the calculated betrayal. "I am not here to save you, Julian," I said, my voice completely steady and brutally loud in the quiet room. "I am the one who sent the emails. I am the one who bought the hidden cameras. I am the one who orchestrated this entire meeting." His mouth opened and closed in silent, horrifying realization. The color drained even further from his face as the sheer magnitude of my trap finally locked into place. I leaned in slightly, looking directly into his terrified, bloodshot eyes, and delivered the final, fatal blow. "You called me a bland, unseen rock sitting right in the middle of your path," I reminded him, hurling his own cruel words straight back into his face. "You claimed my tedious little life was slowly suffocating you. Well, the era of my pathetic mediocrity has officially come to an end. I hope you relish the gorgeous, massive life you built for yourself tonight, because as of this exact moment, you have absolutely nothing left." Julian completely broke. His knees gave out, and he collapsed onto the hardwood floor, surrounded by the scattered divorce papers. He dropped the pillow and grabbed onto my heavy coat, sobbing violently, begging me to stay, begging me to call off the lawyers, begging for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. I calmly reached down and forcefully peeled his trembling fingers off my coat. One by one, I stepped back, looking down at the pathetic ruin of the man I used to love. I did not say another word. I turned on my heel and walked out of the bedroom, leaving him to face the wrath of the billionaire and the total destruction of his career entirely alone. The aftermath of that night stretched on for hours. There were police cars called to handle the trespassing, formal statements taken by the agency lawyers, and a massive, chaotic spectacle that I watched calmly from the safety of my car parked down the road. By the time I finally turned my key in the ignition and drove my sedan down the winding mountain path, the deep black of the night sky was giving way to a brilliant, vibrant sunrise. The morning light painted the horizon in stunning shades of gold and amber. I drove back toward the bustling city, leaving the absolute wreckage of my cheating husband far behind me. I rolled down the window, letting the crisp, fresh morning air fill my lungs, and took a deep, deeply satisfying breath. My new, completely free life had just begun. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Violet Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.